Here we are looking at one of the drawings from chapter 1 in the book, which discusses force. I'm here with Swendly. Hey, Swendly.
Hey, Mike. One common thing that we see is that when students move forward to form and shape, they kind of forget basics.
Mm-hmm.
Basics is it's always important. It's you kind of like stack form and shape on top of basics.
Right.
If you remove that, then they have nothing to support them, and the drawings falls apart.
Yeah, I would agree 100%, right? If we get rid of this, all of a sudden this doesn't really mean anything, right?
Yeah, indeed.
And to your point, I see this a lot. Many people come to drawingforce.com having gone out there, tried to learn form or even rendering or anatomy, but none of that really matters unless you have this underneath all of it. And to be clear about what you're saying there, when you say the drawing has to work, it's not like the drawing has to be good. It's about the drawing has to work, like literally work. It has to have a job and it has to be doing that job. And that
Hmm.
job is typically at the very beginning, the job is to create balance, right? That is
Yeah,
that
exactly.
is the work, right? That's one of the main works. Here we are looking at a drawing from chapter 2 of the Force Companion book, which focuses on taking force and bringing it into structure, space, and or form. You can see here that, Swendly, you're creating a C torso again, right?
Yeah, indeed. And I think, like we mentioned in the first video, once you get to form, force is very important
Mhm.
because it's the foundation on which forceful form stands. So you can just throw it out of the window, like we see happen with a lot of students.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting that here, this torso here, the C shape really does remind me of the flower sack idea from, like Disney animation, right?
Yeah, exactly.
We could see, especially over here, forget about that, but up here, it feels like you're starting to describe the top of the sack as well, right?
Yeah, I'm using the four surface lines to define the top plane of the torso.
Hmm. So these are force surface lines. And that's, as you guys can see here in Swendley's drawing on the left, he's going to be using them quite a bit to sculpt. And sometimes they'll be more purely sculptural, and sometimes they'll be able to give us force and form at the same time, right?
Yeah, indeed. And the funny thing about this is I remember seeing artists drawing like this in the past, and I'm like, how can they draw so loose and end up with a better drawing than when I, go through the process of constructing it with tubes, boxes, and spheres. And my drawings were looking very rigid and stiff, and
Mhm.
I see them drawing loose like this and end up with something better.
Right.
And well, this is the thought process behind it. You're really thinking about sculpting like if you were working with clay, but instead you're working with a force line.
So one of the main areas that happens in form is the idea of understanding perspective and structure, right?
Hmm.
And we have this idea of a box, right? So here's a box, like a three-quarter view box. Um, there's many different ways to sculpt force, and I just want to call out some of the things that Swendley is doing here for you guys. Um, Over here, I call this crawling in, right? I have to, of course, name everything. Everything has to have some kind of weird label for me. Um, so crawling in means, what Swendley did here is he grabbed the force contour edge, right, that we talked about earlier. But the thing to be aware of is that edge is really describing an entire surface in the body. And going through the process of understanding these crawling in moments is a really, really excellent first step into understanding that force actually takes up space. It's also a great way of getting around trying to see the figure as purely just tubes and boxes, which is what typically kills somebody's drawings, right?
Yeah, indeed.
So here we have that contour, and you crawled your way in across to the turning edge, which is right here, which is like the block or the top surface of the leg, right? Right, so we could see that
Y-
this is the box of it, right?
Yeah, indeed, it's a more organic way
Hmm.
to indicate the box. You know, you're showing the plane without running the risk of the leg getting rigid and unforceful.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so this way we're still sculpting with energy, but it's almost like we're sculpting a planar, not more plane, but planar, meaning having planes, like a planar figure, right? You did it here as well. Like you said, well, there's this big surface of force here. Let me just understand this whole surface for now, right?
Yeah, and it's really fun. It's really fun to just sit, and you have to really take your time, but it's a good exercise. Especially I noticed it really prepares you for shape. You have better line control once you get into shape.
So chapter 3 is on shape. But there's a couple of things happening here, right? You mentioned scale, right? So we have scale. And for those of you that don't know what the heck scale means, because you might be thinking of a scale, what we're talking about really is size, right? Like change in size, right? So here you have one foot that is this size, and you have another foot here that is like this size, right? And I stuck a box around each one, which is from the character design book, this idea of a bounding box, right? We can see that the one on the ground is much, much smaller, right? The surface area alone on the page is just so small in comparison to what you did over here with this closer foot, right? Right, so there's a couple of things going on. Scale is just size, right? So you have small and big, and immediately our brain thinks big is closer, right? So we as artists, we can play with that as a trick, as sort of an illusion, right, to the idea of depth on the page, which is really, really powerful. I have to say, for those of you who've never heard about that, I can promise you, as soon as you're done with this video and you go and try that out, you're going to see just how amazing that simple trick is of playing with size or scale, right, to create depth. But it works best, of course, in tandem with structure and perspective, right?
Yeah, indeed, and that's also the value of practicing force form.
Right.
After sculpting the figure with all the surface lines, now you come to the point where you can just visualize it. Like I didn't have to draw the turning edge of the leg. I just show the form using shape.
Shape um, basically creates form, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, that one feels like, what are you talking about? Because I know for me, and I'm sure most others, if you think of shape, you're thinking basically about circles, triangles, and squares. And these are all not only symmetrical, which makes them non-forceful, but flat, right?
Hmm.
So how is it that shape is creating form then?
Well, in the case of the figure, I mean, the figure is not flat; it's three-dimensional. It consists of three-dimensional masses. So the shapes that we see uh, on the figure are actually the outside edges of a form. You
Hmm.
know, so those shapes have volume, and once you're aware of that, you don't draw the volume, but you're thinking about the volume when you draw the shape.